Hello. I'm going to assume we're recording, but I think I asked that because I'm always nervous recording. I get a little nervous.
Yes, we are recording.
Even though we've spoke probably 17,000 hours by now.
Yes, we are recording.
The question I really have is, do you wear socks with slippers, or do you just wear the slippers?
When you say slippers, do you mean indoor slippers?
Yeah, like
Yes.
Slippers. You wear socks with them?
Yes, unless I just got out of the shower.
Son of a bitch! I knew that as I'm wearing these new slippers around the house, and I'm like, my feet are a little sweaty. Do I wear slippers? The concept I don't understand it then, because I just don't understand the concept. I don't want to wear socks. I just want to wear the slippers. But then the slippers are going to get all stinky. I know. Okay.
So I think that if you wash your slippers regularly, like maybe every 2 weeks at the worst, they don't get so stinky.
At the worst, at the best for me.
But I like socks with slippers because I do not like the feeling of the seams where the material comes together at the toes. I do not like how those feel because it reminds me of like sleeping in a bed somewhere you don't live, and then like there's like little pieces of crumbs or sand because the other person isn't so clean or something.
Oh God, you're so funny.
And it just stresses me out to think about something like that. So it kind of creeps me out. So the socks are my foot condom for wearing my slippers.
Well, I'm not a big sock guy, and I don't like blankets over my feet when I sleep. So I don't know. I'm just going to have to buy cheap slippers and dispose of them when they get too stinky after I wash them every 2 weeks. They'll get beaten up anyway. So,
Maybe wash your feet before you put on your slippers.
Well, of course, but still the same sweat. Like what if I'm eating garlic?
Oh.
It's a stinky ordeal no matter what. I don't put underarm deodorant on my feet.
That's true. If you have any suggestions on how to keep Shane's slippers from stinking without wearing socks, you can always submit your suggestions to speakofthedevilpod@gmail.com.
I really got to watch what I talk about while you're recording, because I didn't think this would make it in, but I guess it is.
This podcast is based around the history and experiences of the infamous Shane Bugbee, recollected and retold by Shane Bugbee himself. Who is Shane? Well, you're about to find out. I'm your host, Nannerl, and this is Speak of the Devil. All right, 1999. How old were you, and what were you doing?
I'm 51 now. So what is that? That's 19 years ago? 20 years ago?
Oh
So
my God, it's 20 years ago.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Wow, a 20th anniversary. Okay. So I was 31. Depending on when this happened, what month I probably was 30 because I'm a November baby.
Mm-hmm.
So it was probably 30.
So that means that, yes, you were 30 because Columbine, which we are going to talk about today, had to have occurred in April because it occurred on April 20th.
All right, 30 and a quarter.
Okay, 30 and a quarter. I was and I was in middle school. I was in the 8th grade. How did you find out about the incident?
Oh, wow, what a good question. It's so long ago, and I'm so old that my memory is just full of weird things now. It's you start losing certain spots of your memory and having new ones, and the ones you don't like pop up now. I would imagine it was the internet, because I was pretty plugged in right when the internet happened, when they were calling it the ham radio, the new ham radio. No one was really into the internet. So it was just like geek boards. And at the time, this is a past me that I don't delve into too much. just doing that because of the show. But I was into true crime and I was an angry kid then. And so those things were on my radar immediately. Like if there was something going down, I was like, wow, look at this. And I just got in the wormhole and went, started researching it and reading about it. So I would the internet, the internet would have been where I've heard of it first because I was yeah, yeah.
The reason I ask, and I guess I'm sort of building this up for our listeners to learn about why we're talking about Columbine, which actually is because Shane published a zine back in the day that was called Trenchcoat Diaries. And it's somewhat obscure now because I didn't know anything about it until Shane told me about it. In fact, there was even a video that was a companion piece to it. And it is advertised as a never before seen collection of diary entries, submissions of people who were there, and kind of few and far between. And to me, looking at this was really just something really, a lot of closure for myself. And I wonder how other people would feel about looking at it now. Just a brief piece of reference for myself. Being in middle school, I'm slightly obsessed with this subject matter. And it's because, well, I was told that, and I apologize, my dogs are howling because they have a lot to say about this topic too. I apologize. It's late and there might be a moon outside. And I was told at school that they might be expelling me and they have to see what sort of disciplinary action to take because they heard that I was cool with what happened in Littleton. And I had no idea what anyone was talking about. You know why? Because I didn't watch the news. My TV exposure and my internet use was incredibly limited during that time, and I was sheltered. But I used the internet at the library when I went after school, and guess what I looked up the next day?
Right.
It turned out that I was a target, not just from my peers who sort of found this as an opportunity because there was a witch hunt for kids who were different, but they sort of saw it as, the kids saw it as an opportunity to knock me down a few pegs, and a lot of teachers sort of saw it as a way to out me for being a nonconformist and being the kid who listens to Marilyn Manson.
I saw, that's happened quite often. Like I've heard about this quite often from younger people.
Mm-hmm.
I, of course, was not in school, and I was tending to my dogs at the time. But and those motherfuckers, another part of the show today. Uh, I was tending to that stuff. I guess it just, those dogs. It does become a little distracting when I think about this. But I heard about that often.
I I apologize. We're going to take a quick break. I'm going to see if I can fix this.
Okay, so where we left off, the thoughts that I'd forgotten was I feel bad for you and the children of that generation because I didn't grow up with that. But what we grew up with, before the school shooter, the epidemic was suicide. And so this is how this has evolved from suicide school. Like one person in school would commit suicide. And then 5 other people in the same school would commit suicide within a week. And then a school next to us, a kid would kill themselves. And then 10 more kids over there would kill themselves within a week or two, a month. So that's what we had growing up. And I believe the school shooter grew into, went from suicide to acting out in that way. Mm-hmm. And then the school shooter has sort of evolved into the mass shooter, the alt-right mass shooter of today. It seems that way. Like, that's how it's worked out. I think, I haven't studied this stuff in a decade or more. Mm-hmm. I've gotten from a lot of it, but that was my take. My take on it back then was it went from suicide to school shooter, and the school shooter is turning into serial killers because we had more serial killers in between the mass shooters and the school shootings. So a lot of younger mass serial killers started happening, like a Richard Ramirez, stuff like. But he was before Columbine, excuse me. But
Mm-hmm.
that's how I remember my research. Now this is decades ago, so excuse my if I'm off on the timeline a bit.
I think that the evolution is definitely apparent. Like it's easy to see that evolution. Might I ask, the suicides, the teen suicides that happened in your day, were they very publicly known ones? Like, or like the school announced to the other kids, or?
Yeah, it started to become that where it was like it started to become that because of maybe it hit the newspaper,
Mm-hmm.
in an obituary section. But because it was it became an epidemic. That's where the school notes started to come home. Where hey, we've had this. I don't remember ever having counseling offered to us as kids had in school shootings. But
Mm.
that's where it started to be like a school. The school would send out letters to parents saying, we've had this happen and watch your child. We have this epidemic happening. But it was between the school and the parents, and not the school offering counselors for the kids. We didn't have that. That is something that this your generation may have had if there was a scare in school, let's say.
We sure didn't, or at least I was never offered that. I feel like it was sort of not even the only thing they addressed at school was they definitely kept a better watch of the weird kids and basically told the other kids that it was like a teen version of if you see something, say something, but it was exploited as time to rat everyone out for nothing because they already have a target on their backs.
Yeah, boy, it became an approved bullying. Actually, like when I
Absolutely.
think about that, it became like, hey, that kid's wearing a trench coat, and the jocks don't like him, so they're going to turn him into the teachers, and the teachers are now afraid of a school shooting. So it's everyone pile on the weirdo, the
the
goth, the
the
person who
idea
likes
of
romance.
good kids was a very upsetting thing that was just established even deeper, I think.
Oh
The
yeah,
I
no, go ahead.
Oh, no, please do.
Oh, and that reminds me of when I went and visited Columbine, the
Uh-huh.
school in Littleton. I would sit at a coffee shop, and the kids that were high school age would come in, and the jocks would wear baseball caps backwards and have white T-shirts, clean, pristine, white, new T-shirts, white sneakers, and blue jeans, and they all dressed the same. Different heights, different builds, but they all dressed the same. And then you'd see skater kids, and then you'd see goth kids, and they were the outcasts, the skater kids, the goth kids, the heshers. They were like outcasts. And so that was really interesting to me.
It's almost
Like
like
you're saying,
red versus blue in
yeah,
street gangs.
yeah,
Um
exactly.
or it makes me think of The Warriors a little bit, the
Yeah.
movie with the kids. All the street clans and stuff. And actually that's quite interesting that in the rest of America, skaters are sort of interchangeable with surfers. And at my school, the skaters were the jocks. The jock kids who played football, like we didn't have a football team in middle school because we weren't King of the Hill, but there was an intramural team in town. And all the kids who were kids of the business owners, the car dealers and stuff, who were basically destined to be popular because their parents had a lot of influence and or their parents were cool parents or whatever, all the party kids, they all wore the nice, the skateboard brands of the 90s, blind hookups, all these other with the, very an offshoot from your generation's skate culture. But when the pants got wide legged with the Vans and stuff like that, and it was interesting that those kids were the popular kids. And it really wasn't based on any music either because the 90s was a pretty wide, like, teens listened to all kinds of music. And so it was interesting that I was targeted for the music I listened to. And
The culture
Mhm.
you were attracted to.
Yes. And, myself personally, I didn't see anything wrong with it. And maybe because I wasn't raised with Christianity, I grew up in a Christian town. And so a lot of people actually, there was a time that I was doing homework in a math teacher's classroom who I was getting additional tutoring because I wasn't doing so hot in her class. And she was also the chaperoning teacher for the Christian club. And they decided one time to do a presentation during their club meeting after school talking about banning Marilyn Manson and telling people not to listen to it. And the teacher asks me, "Are you listening?" And it was interesting that little things started to target only me. They felt the need to announce at school that chopsticks are banned at school.
Oh, goodness.
Because
Wow.
I brought ethnic food as a leftovers for lunch because being
Right.
not a rich kid. And it was very obvious who it was aimed toward because the other kids who were kind of, less popular, the Hesher kids, the disenfranchised, I guess they weren't really seen as a threat. And I still to this day question why. And maybe that's why I'm obsessed with this topic, is because I got unwillingly associated with it. So I wanted to know everything about it.
Well, Marilyn Manson became a boogeyman. And, quite frankly, in modern day Satanism,
Mm-hmm.
that we talk about today, it wouldn't be what it is today without Marilyn Manson. He was a true Anton LaVey's friend, and he's the one who spread it to every corner of the earth. His his music did. So rightfully so, the establishment was afraid of him. And like I said, rightfully so. He definitely chipped away at things. Where today I look at it, I'm like, man, that guy does not get his credit for the influence he's had on popular culture at this point. Like
Yes.
popular culture. It wasn't popular back then, and he was definitely a scapegoat.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone who wore his t-shirts became a scapegoat, like yourself, like immediately put into this category of a Satanist, of someone who has problems, someone's going to shoot up the school, someone who's dark. And which is true, which is sort of true. People that were attracted to that kind of stuff, a lot of times Satanists, let's say, they're wearing those things to scare people away because they've been scared enough. So you wear a Baphomet, you put on a Marilyn Manson t-shirt to scare those jocks away. I don't know anything about the culture that you grew up in, as skaters were the jocks, but that was not represented anywhere in anything I've ever read or
No,
heard.
I
Because
think that it's exclusive to where I grew up.
yeah, Thrasher back in my day, they were all like Heshers, skaters.
It was a burnout culture, right?
Yeah, burnout culture and surfboard people, and they were just like, yeah, the burnout culture. So that's where it started to become popular. I miss that. And when things become popular, very much like now, you look at the Satanists of today, the people who and they're very fashionable. They don't have the same heart that a Marilyn Manson or the people of my generation had when we were blazing some of those trails, or the people before us.
The skater kids ended up being the football players and basketball players and baseball players in high school. And they all decided to wear blue jeans after high school and drink at the same country bar. So
Yes.
just to let you know what kind of kids they were, they just did an activity together is what I think is what it is.
And it just seems like more of this institutionally approved bullying that
Yes.
becomes your war heroes, your football hero, your sports heroes, not just football, but all of the sports.
A lot of them had cops as parents also.
Right. So it becomes the status quo's army. They're going to put us in line, the people who just want to be free thinkers and do what we want, as long as we're not, doesn't include hurting people, but I don't think we see dogs as separate from ourselves a lot of times. People like ourselves, I can't speak for everyone, but a lot of my generation Satanists see animals as, I'm an animal and you're an animal, puppy. We try to communicate in that way, where these people are like, your puppy dies and you're like, it's a fucking dog, get over it. That's the kind of mentality that institutionally approved bullying brings. And it's for me, how I see it now is it's totally on the outs. Like, that stuff is obsolete. It's part of the boomer thing. and the boomer parents handed it
Yes.
to Gen X, and some Gen X people hold it, and maybe some of the millennials hold it from Gen X parents, but the younger kids, no fucking way.
I don't think the Generation Y kids are going to be that way with their kids. I think their kids are going to be the first kids with no racist grandparents and the
Right.
first kid like Generation Z. I really have a lot of I look forward to seeing what they all do when they're all grown up.
I so wish I could be 10 years old right now because of that.
I
It's
know.
so
I
true.
envy 10-year-old kids. They have really
And
good childhoods.
yeah, and it's like the Native Americans. Been told this on many reservations, not just one, but they see this concept, and I understand that there's tribes that see things differently. I
Mm-hmm.
understand it's not all the same, but the concept I've heard multiple times through multiple tribes, so that's
Mm-hmm.
why I repeat it this way.
Yes.
And it's like it takes 8 generations for you to see change, or the seeds
Yes.
you plant. The
Mm-hmm.
influence you plant now will fruit in 8 generations, and you're lucky to see that in your lifetime if you see it. But usually you don't see it. You might feel you see it, but it's an ebb and flow type of thing where it goes away before those 8 generations, and the true change happens in 8 generations. And I like that concept. I can't see. It's not that I like the concept, but as I get older, I'm like, holy shit! Never thought I'd see gay marriage. You know?
Yeah. Even how sensitive kids are now, or like I think kids are genuinely kind and polite compared to now.
Yes.
And you were saying about like how the boomers kind of established something. Definitely, because they had their boxes full of ticky tacky and all these picket fence childhood with these indoctrinated videos on what's good, what's bad. And so they basically established this social apartheid of teens. I think that the way that Gen X did it was now as some of the Gen X parents. I think there's a little bit of overcompensation of being a latchkey kid. So they've become sort of nightmare parents in being a little bit too much of a helicopter with their children. And so it's not necessarily amongst social circles, but parents who overcompensate and bully the teachers and like, why isn't my child getting a good grade? And I think that comes from the latchkey kid culture.
Can you explain what a helicopter is in reference to
Yes.
parents?
Yes. A helicopter parent is a parent who feels the need to hover over everything their child does. In fact, they often do their homework for them. They will call an employment office or HR to get their child hired. They will call admissions and records of colleges and try to sweeten the deal or talk the school into admitting their child and basically do all the work for their kids. And it's not exclusive to Gen X as parents. I think that my parents were a bit of helicopter parents as well. I was a little sheltered too, but not to the extent that I think now a lot of the parents, I think that they may have been let run wild a little bit and felt maybe a little bit left out or like neglected by their parents. So they felt like I need to make sure I hug my children all the time. And their intentions are good, but I think they hug a little too tight.
Oh, hmm. I don't. For me, it becomes again nuanced or personal because I don't know if you can hug too tight, but I wasn't hugged. So, when you're not hugged, you can be hugged by thousands and it's not enough.
Perhaps a hug isn't so much of it, but how would you feel if your mother was the one calling from a payphone getting you out there as a publisher rather than you doing all the work
Okay.
yourself?
So we're talking again, like we spoke in the bully episode again about like the concept of a thin line between control and guidance,
Absolutely. And the parents are absolutely bullies in these situations.
and they're controlling.
Yes.
I see. So that I'm not into, and I broke away from that. I ran away at a young age because they were way too controlling and way too mean.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, yeah, fuck that.
I think helicopter parents are also very like just deathly afraid of their children failing. And so a lot of that comes from they can't just let their kids do something themselves. They have to like do everything for them. And it's something that I don't think quite existed during Columbine. Just segging back to our topic.
You think we live in a culture that is sort of evolving out, but a culture of narcissism,
Yes.
where it's like clinical narcissism is different. But picking up the traits of a narcissist, where a parent isn't afraid their kid's going to fail, they don't want their kids to be more successful.
Oh, my father. My father was
or
that
they
way.
want to take credit for the success. Now, what did you say? Because I spoke over it.
I said my father was that way, and my dad's a little of a Joe Jackson sometimes, and I think
from Michael Jackson.
Yeah. Like his I feel very sympathetic toward child actors and young talents who had parents like that, because my dad was a little of that, and I think maybe that's where some of my escape of being an early Marilyn Manson fan at that age kind of came from too, is that escape from the stresses of having parents hovering, but also having being bullied at school, like you were saying, that sort of idea of being the boogeyman. I already felt like I was different, and I guess that I didn't feel like there would be any repercussion of this until Columbine, and then I kind of felt like I had to put it in my pocket and hide it.
Yeah.
Oh, you were talking about the Marilyn Manson shirts. Real quick, I wanted to mention I did not have any shirts or posters because my parents hated Marilyn Manson. In fact, I've bought Antichrist Superstar 3 times because it got destroyed by my parents twice. And I actually made myself a scrapbook of clippings I stole from the library of Marilyn Manson in like magazines and like quotes I liked of Marilyn Manson. And I had this little scrapbook about this thick of like photos and song lyrics and stuff. And it was sort of my little like positive reinforcement. It got me through the day to look at it and just feel good. And it kind of it made me feel like my goal wasn't to inflict pain or revenge. My goal was to be more successful than my peers. And he was sort of an inspiration, I feel like.
And I often think LaVey's book, the Satanic Bible, if it were named differently and you put LaVey like in one of these gardener's caps where he's playing with flowers and you reword the inside, you can sell that fucking book as a self-help book. Because that's how I see it quite often. Even though he speaks about, Satanists are born and they're not created. I can understand what he's saying, the inquisitive nature that we have. And I don't like to say we with the word Satanist, but the inquisitive nature, that is something that seems to be the thread that ties a lot of what I see as genuine Satanists and not fashionable Satanists together, is that that inquisitive nature, that wanting to know more, the intellectual, and the integrity and intellectualism is what ties us together. And so, anyway.
Later on, I discovered Satanic Bible because I didn't know who Marilyn Manson was talking about regarding Anton LaVey until I looked up, and then I felt like, oh shit, this is my missing piece.
Exactly my point when I say Marilyn Manson. Like, there was a black metal band online a couple days ago. They made fun of Marilyn Manson, and I schooled the kid. I'm like, dude, you wouldn't know what Satanism is without Marilyn Manson. You're a 30-year-old kid, and I can guarantee you wouldn't know. You wouldn't learn it from Alice Cooper or Ozzy Osbourne or any other bands that were around in my day.
He's a gateway.
Right. Yeah, he was the guy that gave you that gift. If you don't understand it, look into the history of your music, your black metal. Marilyn Manson, not Motley Crue, not any of these little bands. Marilyn Manson blessed you with Anton LaVey's self-help. If you go that way philosophically, not everyone's going to be helped by that, but you were, and I know plenty of people I've turned on to. I remember this young lady, she had been victimized, raped by someone, and she was talking to me about it, and I was like, well, call the police. And she's worried about the guy, and I said, men are more fearful of women than. Than. And I gave her the Satanic Bible. I said, check this out. I remember giving it to her, and maybe that'll help you out. She loved it, and she did eventually, like a week later, she called the cops on the guy. She felt that empowered her. So I felt like it's an empowering self-help book for people who are been bullied too much. A lot of times it's like, and that's the circus that LaVey gave us, is the idea that we were going to scare you. We're going to take your God or your religion, and we're going to reverse it and scare you. We're going to wear black. We're going to, you're going to fear us. And, beyond the fashion of it, though, I think we are a scary group, and rightfully so, because we're not mediocre.
Absolutely. So coming back onto topic regarding Trenchcoat Diaries, I guess where to begin. Why do you think the boys did the shooting? Do you? I'm going to rephrase that because that's such a it's kind of a loaded question and broad. But do you think that they snapped, or do you think that it was completely predestined that Eric was going to do so as an elaborate murder-suicide?
I think and this is maybe weird, but a lot of people talk about art being an expression.
Mm-hmm.
And I happen to think art is more than an expression. But for any of those people who say, well, art's just an expression, it's communication, I say, well, then the Columbine kids were artists. If that's the case, if that's the definition of art, they were artists. And I think honestly, if you look at it that way, they were reverberating what was going on in society. They were looking to be teachers. They were looking to be martyrs, not victims. But they were looking to show, because I know some of the, some of the videos that they released, hours of videos of them talking about their philosophy and why they did this, is tied into like might is right and Satanism and the alt-right shooters of today. They're tied into that. But the police would not let that be released, and they actually destroyed those tapes right after all the parents of the victims saw them. They let the parents of the victims see these videos, and then they destroyed them because they said they're too dangerous to let out. If we let these videos out to the public, it will influence massive amounts of this stuff. And so because of that, and just because of what I know they were doing there, I think they were looking to give you a lesson, give all of us a lesson in the pain of fucking football. When you're an intellectual at school and you're really fucking smart and you're smarter than these people and you should be climbing the ladder better, but nepotism and bullying is what works. And so I think they were a little pissed off by that stuff. And that's where I relate with these kids. They were bullied by people who, and I don't like to say lesser, but bullied for no good reason, but because they were really smart, or they read a lot, or they consumed a lot of artwork. Rammstein was brought in it too, and I was like, wow, Rammstein is such a high-end band for young kids like that to listen to. Like, they're an intellectual band. They're like high-end music. Marilyn Manson's not necessarily as high-end as Rammstein. Rammstein's a higher on an intellectual level or an age level. They're communicating to an older crowd, and those kids were into Rammstein. It was like, I just think like most of these kids are picked on because they're exceptional. And that's, I think a lot of the school shooters are exceptional children who are kind-hearted, and they're taken advantage of, and they're exploited by people who present themselves as strong but are actually weak inside. Their face, their outside body, they're strong, and they're able to present it that way, but inside they're very insecure and weak. And so they see someone, it's very much like the LaVey thing again, like the concept of what you present is opposite from what's inside. And I think they present strength, but they're insecure inside. And I think these kids were insecure. These kids were secure with what they were. They're like, I'm a computer nerd. I'm going to read about computers. I'm going to read about science. I'm going to read about this. I'm going to study this. I'm very smart. I read a lot of books. I consume a lot of great art that jocks don't understand it. They're not going to understand Rammstein or Marilyn Manson. They're going to understand the Eagles or Don Henley or some shit like that. And it's like, I think if there was a root thing, that's part of it. But I also know at this age, that's me studying it 20 years ago. Today, I can tell you the reason for school shooters and serial killers and mass shooters is no one fucking knows. Because when you put all the evidence on the table, you could like, well, there's millions of people who consume Marilyn Manson. There's millions of people who have been beaten by their parents. There's millions, and they don't act this way. So it's sort of that Frank Zappa logic I've talked about before. Like when someone acts out like that, usually they're just crazy. And you can look into their life and see if they're righteously crazy or genetically crazy. And most of the time you'll find like they had a lot of, like when you asked if they snapped, I think that's what it comes down to with a lot of people. They have a lot of traumas, and what is traumatic to one person isn't necessarily traumatic to others. And so when these kids are being bullied, and I can say, well, hundreds of thousands of people have been bullied and they didn't shoot up the school. That doesn't mean, we live a nuanced, individual, circumstantial existence, and that's not accepted yet in our culture. And I think those are the things that affected those children, where they're like, I fucking can't handle my mom not hugging me anymore. Everyone else has new shoes. I don't. The football players pick on me. Fuck this. They're dead. And I remember one time I said, if brothels were still legal, we wouldn't have school shooters. Because 20 years ago, I felt it's about kids not getting laid. I think people call it incels now.
Yes.
And so back then I thought that was a major problem, but it's not. There's plenty of people that don't get laid and aren't hurting anyone. So it's like there's no way there might be a way in the future, but right now, anyone who says they know why someone hurt another person like that in these cataclysmic, amazing events, and I don't mean amazing in a positive way, just like, holy shit, how could you fucking do that? And so for me, I related to him in a lot of ways, but I also I've never killed anyone that I know of. Joking. But, I've never killed anyone, so I don't relate with them in that way.
A follow-up question to this I have for you is that there's oftentimes I've heard so many times the implication, and even back then I sort of felt like one was definitely wearing the pants in the friendship. Do you think that a lot of it was going toward one person's goal and the other was in it for the ride? I know that's a hard one because you can't really say. And a couple things before that I think of is that in this Trenchcoat Diaries, Eric Harris, which is the one that I'm hypothesizing was pulling the strings, that he was the depressed one and he was medicated. And I know that was used against him a lot. But also, I remember watching the TED Talk on YouTube. By the way, not all TED Talks are good, and this one I have mixed feelings about. But Dylan's mother was a TED Talk speaker, and she talked about how she wished she knew this other friend being so unhappy and things like that. And I know that it's someone else's mother talking about someone else, so there's a lot of bias, but what do you think about that?
Well, I think with the natural order, it's sort of like that's how things happen. I noticed myself, sometimes people fall in line behind me and take me as the leader. And sometimes I fall in behind other people and they're the leader. And I notice I start imitating their moves. I'm like, look, he just went for a drink and I went for a drink. What my chimpanzee is on full bloom right now. And I'm like, so I see that in so many walks of our life that it makes sense on that level. Yes. But when you're driven to murder people and stuff like that, there's a toxic coupling, like there's something toxic going on there that is extraordinary. Like it's just extraordinary, just like love. They had a love that everyone can pontificate on, but I wouldn't say that one was more responsible than the other, if that makes any sense. I wouldn't say that one was more responsible. The dog is digging in the keyboard right now, so let you people know.
I completely
That's the problem.
apologize, everyone. We're talking about an event from the 90s, and here my dog is in my room digging holes just like that window or that old Windows After Dark screensaver. Just being a bad dog, just like
Yeah.
bad dog. It's really tough to say. It was really eye-opening looking at your publication. The biggest thing that stood out to me was the interview from Marilyn Manson. I was actually curious, did you acquire that interview directly?
I got it from the record company, yes, because I was part of that stuff when early on. I was offered a Trent Reznor interview and I turned it down when they were TVT Records and they just did TV tunes. Like they
Wow.
just and I just thought it was I didn't know who Trent Reznor was, and they sent me the cassette and I didn't even listen to it because of the label that it was on. It was all jokes, and I didn't like joke music.
Mm.
And Trent Reznor was in the background. They're like, "You want to talk to Trent Reznor?" And he's like, "I'll do it." And I'm like, "I don't know. I don't know anything about his music." And then they sent me the cassette, and he took off. And I wished I would have talked to him. But they sent Marilyn Manson into my gallery. So I was good. I did a zine back then called Naked Aggression, and it was popular. And that's how I knew the Trenchcoat Mafia. And that's how, when they turned over some of this stuff that's in that zine, it was because there was no internet like you think. It was
Yeah.
just happening. So the communication wasn't instant like it is now. And so we were still doing P.O. boxes and mailing stuff. And they knew who I was because my reputation in that world, underground or dark arts, was huge then. Now it's sort of, there's a lot of static out there right now.
Kids, you should know that in 1999, just to look at a JPEG image, it took like 5 minutes for a
Yeah,
picture to show up that was like equivalent to a scan of a photo taken with a fun saver. Oftentimes, we didn't have Reddit yet. We had something called the Bulletin Board System, the
right.
BBS. There were tons of forums and chat rooms of all kinds. Yahoo Groups was hot. And do you know what was really fire? Angel Fire,
Yeah,
GeoCities.
yeah, yeah,
And you
yeah.
could make all kinds of websites.
Right.
Um,
And so the label knew who I was by reputation, and they catered to me often. I always got tickets to those shows, and it was real nice. And that's how that's how I got the interview. I think they may have sent it out to a they did it, and they sent it out to because it was a big deal at the point. They started to send it out to a handful of publications, so it may have been quoted or used here or there.
it seemed like a more raw version of what Rolling Stone released
There you
around
go.
that same time. And it seems like yours was just uncut, whereas the Rolling Stone one seemed very polished.
Yeah, there you go.
Um,
That's
I did want to read actually a quote from that, and then I wanted to talk about the internet of those days and sort of what was being posted by not the Trenchcoat Mafia, but the two shooters. A quote I wanted to read you all from this article by Marilyn Manson was, "We applaud the creation of the bomb, whose sole purpose is to destroy all mankind, and we grow up watching our president's brains splattered all over Texas. Times have not become more violent. They just have become more televised. Does anyone think the Civil War was the least bit civil? If television had existed, you could be sure they would have been there to cover it, maybe even participate in it. Like the violent car chase of Princess Di. Disgusting vultures looking for corpses, exploiting, fucking, filming, and serving it up for our hungry appetites in a gluttonous display of endless human stupidity."
I
And my
oh
favorite,
go ahead.
no, just my favorite quote about Columbine so far.
I love that he equates it with war because, and I say this because I saw it the similar way back then. I did a book, which I lost in a storage area snafu that maybe we spoke about before, maybe we haven't. And if we haven't, we should. It was an awful moment in my life. But I lost a book that was called Jihad USA. And I saw this as a jihad, an act of an act of, like I said, education. We're going to die for our beliefs. We're going to die to make the world a better place. These are what, and I think that's fanatical, and I'm against that kind of. I'm against people making martyrs of themselves, or, I'm totally against that fanaticism. But I think that's where Dylan and Eric were coming from. I don't know if all school shooters are coming from that, but I think there's something to be said for needing to be seen and needing to be heard, and that might be one of the threads that ties into all school shooters too. Is they need to be seen and heard and taken seriously. And when they're not, they do something as a part of our species to become seen and heard and reckoned with.
It's that need for validation, and
Wow.
it's their last hurrah.
Yeah.
I feel like the quote is so dead on, and I think that it really made me cynical when this happened about media sensationalism, because even in 99 I felt like something was up with the news when I started seeing the replays of the news footage. And actually, that was something about this zine too, everybody. There's a lot of things in this zine that do not match up with what's on the news.
Excellent point. That is something I wanted to say, that I had thought of. The one memory that came back to me that ties in today when we spoke about doing this show, was the idea that this is the first moment of the internet where you're seeing
Fake news.
I don't want to use that word because
I'm sorry.
It's a dog. It's like it's not a dog, but it's used by too many people to mean too many things. This is the first time you saw news being manipulated to serve the individual's need.
Confirmation bias.
Okay. Okay. But that was like, a lot of people used it to besmirch mental health or medications that people were taking, and thousands of people were taking them. There was only one who started up a school, but they immediately laid it on whatever their fetish, their political fetishes were. Satanism, medication,
American
and that was
values.
The first time. What was that?
American values was another one.
That was the first time where everyone had not everyone, but a lot of people on the internet had their voice. And so the problem with my book, Jihad USA, would have been that with that book, had I been able to release it, was I took too many of those points and put them in the book and validated them. Whereas I think about them older, I'm like, yeah, that was like, I guess what we're saying is fake news. But it didn't come from a news source. Right. It came from an individual who was like, I can believe it's the medication. It's the medication. When they tried to piece things together based on what they could find online or books. And at the time, a lot of stuff wasn't online. So, yeah, I agree. I like what you're saying there. Absolutely. The news there's a media bias, and it is definitely an odd bias. And I think some of the kids at the school, I think you mentioned to me, some of the kids at the school were even saying this wasn't, the news did not report the truth.
Right. There's a few different anecdotes within the submissions of their personal experiences. Yes, in your zine, that they were saying that they were watching the news and it seemed like the news was making it up as they went along. And they were getting frustrated at home and all these different things about how the location of the gunman or what was happening was completely different, and then that information was being relayed to the police.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's true. And unfortunately, people don't understand how the media works or broadcasting works. I've since worked in broadcasting and media, and you do have to report things fast, and sometimes you are wrong, and a story flushes out, and you're like, we were wrong about that. And so, because of the internet, people were able to go, hey, they reported it wrong. And a lot of conspiracy theorists, which I'm totally against, they would take that and go, look at the news is lying to us. And even as a journalist back then, I was like, they're not lying to you. The story hasn't been really written. They're reporting it moment by moment. I was watching this shooting live. I remember watching it live on TV or something like that, like the news. I was like, holy fucking shit. And I started to think things were going on that never panned out as far as evidence goes.
Yes. So, real quick, before I go on to my next topic, I was curious. The people who submitted their stories, did you guys ask for them, or did they submit them willingly?
Both. They started to like I was saying earlier. Like I just was a big deal publisher back then in the underground stuff, and so a kid who eventually he was tied into the he was one of their friends. I I forget his name, and he lives in Arizona now, or he did, a decade ago. Last time I kept up with him, he contacted me and said, I have some stuff I want to send you. And he sent me a bunch of their poems and jokes and weird shit that he had in like one of a couple of their diaries. So he was part of the Trenchcoat Mafia. He was brought into it and accused of being part of it. And my belief is he probably knew about it and backed out of it because they had a good amount of evidence to say, dude, you had to know something about this. And I think he was just a person that's like, I'm not going to be a part of this. And I don't think he believed they were going to do it. Like, and then because it's one of these things that's like, how you gonna? That's like hard to believe, especially back then when it wasn't happening. Like, I'm gonna shoot up the school. We're gonna, like, yeah, okay. I said the same thing with Matt Dwyer 20 years prior to that. So, we were gonna shoot up the school too, but we never did. So it was, I think it was one of those things. I don't think the kid was active planning in it, but I think he understood what was going to happen, and he
Was
didn't
it the
say it.
guy who went by the name Reb at the end of it who said that,
No,
like, he was their friend and stuff?
no, Reb is one of the. I forget if he's Dylan or Eric. I mean,
It's
and my zine.
Eric. But
Yeah.
there's another Reb mentioned later who misses Eric and Dylan.
Well, that zine probably has typos. It's
Okay.
typical of my thing. I don't, or maybe someone was using that name that wrote. I
Oh,
don't know.
maybe they just took on the name afterwards or something because
Right.
he was like Reb Doomer or something like that. Eric was online.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it was something like that. Someone
Okay.
took it as a tribute or something like that. Again, it's an independently produced zine. We just don't have the resources to fine tooth comb it, typos, and
You didn't have me working.
that's right.
Um, Actually, this is a good segue into the website, the Reb Doomer letters and things like that. Eric, a lot of people may not know this, but Eric had this website that he would put journal entries, and it was sort of like his blog, basically. And some of it involved information that about like bomb making and other kind of anarchist cookbook quasi like things. And it was obvious that he was trying to gear up for something, if not get all the, the thumbs up and snaps for his endeavors. Much like someone, like a really fucked up, terrible version of people on Reddit showing, their project or whatever. And it's a little scary to look at some of these things he said in this zine that you guys put about pipe bombs and powder and very dangerous things, because the first thing that comes to mind is Atomwaffen and use of like 4chan and 8chan to share this kind of information. And this is quite the predecessor to it.
Oh yes, it is. And well, back in the day, the kids, the internet was the wild, wild west. We got music for free. We didn't pay.
Rotten.com.
What was that?
Rotten.com.
Yeah, rotten.com. So we didn't pay for music back then, kids. The internet was a free flowing, free thought space. And yes, people spoke about bomb making, and people would correct them and say, I'm a bomb maker. That's wrong. Your recipe's wrong. So people would correct the anarchist cookbook and say it was wrong. It'll get you hurt. It was a really neat. I really liked the beginning of the internet. I like that Wild West, and the control of it now is becoming bullyish and lacking the guidance.
Absolutely.
And I like guidance into the idea of privilege and communicating about privilege to people that have it and they don't understand it. We need more guidance and less bullying, because people start to get firm in their ways and they're not hearing anymore with bullying.
Education versus cancel culture is definitely
Yeah.
a good way of doing it.
Yeah.
I do not think that things should be censored and free speech should be censored as much as it gets nowadays. But at the same time, I do not condone bomb making at the same
Yeah,
time. So it's an interesting
well,
dichotomy.
here's what I condone. I condone people like Reb expressing himself fully and talking about wanting to make bombs. What I think goes along with free speech that no one practices anymore is
Mm.
free hearing, like listening to some child who's doing that and going, "Hey, yo, what's going on, man? Why are you what are you looking to be a guy who destroys buildings or are you looking to hurt people? Like where is the guidance there? Where these kids were screaming out for years before they did this.
Yes.
Where was they had their expression on. They were expressive. So where did anyone hear them? And maybe that's where these things escalate when someone's really in pain and crying out
The
and
echo chamber.
yeah, no one's taking them seriously. It escalates. I know as a person like that I've had to stop my own self from escalating certain situations where I feel I'm not being heard. And I'm lucky to have art in my life and guides who are artists and mentors that were artists that brought me along and say, this is where that goes. This is where that goes. It doesn't go and hurt people unless, I did artwork that I wanted to hurt people. But, that's a different thing. But I express myself honestly, and I think honesty is the best policy. So Reb or these guys were being honest in their
How
in
they
their
felt.
yeah. So there's some sort of integrity there. But I get what you're saying. They're it's a weird thing to communicate. There's integrity there when they shot up a place and cut like. It's the same thing with the 9/11 people who flew planes in the building. There is some sort of integrity there, but it's awful.
You're going to be somehow quoted by someone else out of context with what you just said. My goodness.
It's fine. I don't think there's other intellectuals who have said it because people say they're weak or all this stuff, and I'm like, no, it's the exact opposite of weak. Like that was a strong act, and they have these are definitions we use. It's true. Those school shooters were expressive and they were honest about things. That's why I think artwork is more than an expression because, you can equate anything with, anything violent, especially with expression or what have you. So
This topic definitely holds hands with another topic I'm going to quickly tease to you guys, but you have to wait till another episode, which is about a book called Art That Kills. And this really goes hand in hand because it sort of highlights that world. Art That Kills, probably the most mainstream names in there are Marilyn Manson on the cover, and then Gigi Allen's on the back of it. And even Gigi Allen is not, everyone knows who Marilyn Manson is, including my parents. They may not know who Gigi Allen is. But this story sort of put the spotlight on that world of art.
And who else is in there?
Oh, Mr. Bugbee is in there.
That's right.
And that's why we're going to talk about it.
Oh, God.
Shane Bugbee and his long hair and his, he looks exactly the same, everybody. And if you ever hear him complain about how he looks in the camera or in lighting, just tell him how he looks exactly like how he does in Art That Kills.
I do?
Yes.
Oh, that's good.
I think I knew exactly who it was without reading any text in there.
That's sort of like, when you hang out with Satan, that kind of shit happens.
Absolutely. The last thing I want to talk about here is the third gunman and other conspiracies that sort of popped up in there. Do you recall any of these?
Oh, I do. I recall a lot of them, like the police were in on it. The one that sticks with me is where they went and got pizza. And I used to get this every year on 420, their favorite pizza, which I think was green pepper, mushroom, and pepperoni.
Yeah,
and
something like that.
But they would go to this pizza spot, and that's where they hung out often to talk about. That's where they would have their discussions with this other kid.
They worked there too, right?
That for a brief time, right?
Okay.
So it was the hangout for all these goth, angry people, and two of the people who worked there at the time that they, when they were, they knew Eric and Dylan. They were questioned by the police as suspects. along with the Arizona kid. Those kids were ended up murdered and put in a dumpster behind the place, and they called it a robbery. So that's one thing I'm always interested in. The same as like Ferguson, the riots in Ferguson, Missouri, I believe it is, but it's by St. Louis. A
Yeah.
lot of a lot of the activists that were involved in that protest that turned riotous were murdered. I think we're at a count of over a dozen, which is becomes something. I think those numbers lead to we need to do research and find evidence because that's that's a weird coincidence, you
Oh,
know.
yes, absolutely.
And Littleton was not a Littleton is a very rich, very wealthy neighborhood. And so I when I visited there, like I said, the kids were in white. Um, I went to the so it's just a very wealthy place. I remember going to the sporting goods store in the mall,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a black T-shirt on with blue jeans and white sneakers. I walk in there to buy some Columbine shirts because that's where they saw the football team shirts and stuff. And I remember the guy goes, "Children of the Corn." I'm like, "What in the fuck? Just because I have a black shirt on?"
That was the first thing he could think of. That was like his remark, though?
His bullying, like it's like,
Right. What a baseless. Okay.
and
Anyway.
yeah, I went in to buy the, whatever. Yeah, but he right away made fun of it and all this. And I remember when I went to the school, like talked to some kids, like pulled into the school and talked to some skater kids and some heshers and gave them the zines. And then I was standing in the parking lot talking to a handful of them, and they go, "We gotta go." They saw this truck pull in, a white pickup truck with a bunch of kids with white shirts on, and they pull up right behind my car. And they're like, "What are you doing here? What's going on here?" And these kids take off. They take the zines and take off. And I said, "Well, I'm here. We're going to do these bushes here, like at Disneyland, where they carve the animals into bushes. But we're going to do the victims of Columbine in bushes around the driveway here.
Mm.
And I'm here helping with the landscaping. And where do you think Dylan and Eric should go?" And they go cross-eyed because they're football players and they don't know
Right.
what to think. And
Right.
steam starts shooting out of their ear. And I'm like, "Let me pop the trunk and get my tool." And I pop the trunk and then they take off because they're also afraid of
Of
another shooting.
my goodness.
They and that was right there. I was like, "Thank you, Eric and Dylan. Thank you for giving me that power over these bullies." Because
Shit.
because in any other situation, I would have popped that trunk, they would have still came at me. But
Pushed
in
you in
that
the trunk or something.
yeah, they would have said, "Oh, bring out a ball bat." They would have never
Mm.
considered that I might pull out something, a wrecking machine like a gun. And I'm anti-gun, but it was nice to be able to scare away jocks who at one time stuck my head in a toilet and flushed it. It was really nice. And I can't deny that that was a great feeling, you know? And so,
Absolutely.
and I know those kids, when I talk to those skaters, I'm like, they're like, "Yeah, they're heroes to us. They're heroes to us." And then they went in the building, and then a guard, one of the school guards that was dressed in normal clothing,
Yeah.
had one of the zines in his hand. He came up and said, "Hey, you can't be here. We've already called the police." And I said, "I don't know what you're talking." He goes, "You can't be here." And I go, "I'm not." And I got in my car and drove away. He tried to block the thing, like my car. And I go, "Dude, I'll run over you. Get out of the way." And everyone in that privileged, pretentious neighborhood had a bigger than normal fear bone. Because then he looked and went, "Man, this guy might run me over." He got out of the way of the car, and I drove away. you know. And so that was that. Sorry if I rambled on to the
Oh
story.
no, no. This is quite an interesting insight. The idea that these two people were heroes to them because they changed. It's a different thing because those people are either secondhand experiencers or experienced and survivors of something,
Yeah,
and they perhaps hero was what a teenager would say first thing off their head, but I think of it almost like it definitely changed life for them forever in that town.
change it for you too.
Absolutely.
Change it for everyone in your generation. That's how what a crazy move that was, where it really changed things. For me, I've always wanted to be an advocate for school shooters. When I hear about them today, I have sympathy for them. I have compassion for them, and I want to go talk to them and figure out what happened. Did your uncle touch you? What's going on, dude? Why did you resort to this? Why did you want to give it all up? And I saw a video recently. I know I've said that before to people, and they're like, "You're sick." They should, people make fun of that system, but I want to talk to those kids. I'm one of them. And I saw a video recently in Oregon. A kid came in with a shotgun or a gun, and a teacher was able to talk him out of it. Immediately, like went at him, got the gun, and gave him a big hug. And he was hugging the kid, and the kid just broke down and was taking the hug. And I'm like, that's exactly it. This kid is fucking heartbroken to the bone where he doesn't want to live anymore. This is suicide, but he wants to leave a mark. He doesn't want to go have suicide knowing, just his parents deal with it. He wants to give suicide he wants to give the pain, like
He
in the
wants
movie,
to kill the pain.
or he wants to give them pain. Like he wants to, this school has caused me to want to end my life. Therefore, I'm going to give you some of that pain. I'm going to give you a slice of my pain. And I remember watching the movie The Crow. I know I'm a grandpa, but there's this movie called The Crow, kids. And part of it, it's an illustrated book as well. It's a book. They live forever. The crow grabs the guy's hand and goes, "I want to give you a gift." And he grabs his enemy's hand and he puts all of the awful thoughts that was in his head, all the murders, all the stuff he's seen, and gave it to the guy. Like, shh. And the guy short circuits and dies. And I'm like, that is sort of the concept there. Is like, we want to give you a gift. Like a lot of times with art that kills, you brought that up. And we'll talk about this again. A lot of times when I made artwork that I wanted to hurt people, I wanted to give you the gift my father gave me. I wanted to give you that gift. It's not a gift you want, right? But you're going to
Right.
get it. And it's, anyway, we'll talk about that another time.
I think that it's very unfair to assume that someone's pain is the same as yours or
Yeah.
others' pain. And I think that the superpower the crow has is absolutely needed in this world. By the way, R.I.P. Brandon Lee.
Yeah, right. I'll tell you, when I talked on the Ely, Minnesota episode, it's one of our shows, I talked about, and I maybe said this, that I knew that leaving Ely peacefully would cause violence, would cause problems. Peace is not a peaceful thing all the time. And I think a lot of times when you see school shooters, whatever their mental hangups are, we're all looking for peace and love. There's something to that phrase, that hippie fucking phrase that my generation was against. There's something to it that is innate within us. We're looking for peace. And if we can't get peace, some of us, we're going to shoot up the school. We're going to take peace away from you. And it becomes almost like an occult ritual. The people who have peace are going to get shot. And I'm going to take your peace from you because I've never had it. And this is the only way I can obtain it, is to take it from you. And I think, in this world, if you're against this kind of violence, you should be really trying to advocate for peace and love more and more, and trying to reach out to people who have never had peace and love and figure out a way to give them that. Because I think that's maybe a solution to some of this.
I just wanted to have that quick introspective silence there because I really like what you just said. I was curious, besides the security guard, was there any other backlash about your zine, or did anyone come forward after you had distributed the zine to give you any feedback, whether good or bad?
Shit, dog. I'm teasing, man. But I got to tell you, take you back to the day. I get death threat a day. I get a death threat a day, and I loved it. I loved every minute of it. People call, going to come over and shoot up the office. I said, "You want the address?" People call, threaten myself. I'd say, "You want the address? We'll have a fight, and I'll take you home. I'll buy you pizza afterwards, and I'll take you home. Here's my address." And I'd give them my address, and I said, "The door's unlocked. Just walk right in." And I would unlock the door, and people that work with me are like, "You fucking nuts? What the fuck is your problem?" I go, "Fuck that. I'm not. They're never gonna come. People who threaten. But I'm from Chicago. You learn this. People who talk don't do. People who shoot up the place, they're hiding in the shadows. They don't want to get caught. They're gonna go, okay. I'm in the bush waiting for him to come home. I'm going to get him in the bush and hide out. Go, run." No one's talking. Those are jocks.
Did anyone from that town threaten violence on you for releasing this? Because I could see it also being sort of an advocacy for ruining the story for everyone else.
I was threatened with lawsuits. See, this is a zip code thing or a cultural thing. I'm from a lower zip code. I'm from the upper low class, lower middle class. And so there you deal with things with violence because you don't have lawyers. But in Littleton they had lawyers, so I was threatened with lawsuits. And I ran an ad in the National Enquirer, which was a big tabloid at the time. And I don't know if anyone knows about it. It was like, I ran ads in that and said, call my and I had an 800 number, call the 800 number to buy this exclusive content, this Columbine stuff. And, sold a truckload of that shit, like sold a bunch, sold probably 5,000, 10,000, something like that. But because but the internet has killed publishing. Thanks, kids. You get it for free now.
Kids, you don't know who Bat Boy is, and that's a shame.
That is a shame. And once you're going to put it all over the internet for free, and Bat Boy's going to be on the street.
Bat Boy's going to become a meme, and that's going to be a very depressing day. Please keep Bat Boy off the internet.
Oh, yeah.
We saw earlier a Hey Vern gif involving magic, and I feel like that was the absolute end of the internet. Well, this is
some laughs at the end of the show.
This has been a really revealing episode and an interesting piece of time. We both definitely were affected by this in our own ways, despite us both being different generation. Myself, an old millennial; yourself, Gen X. It's interesting how we saw it through a different lens, different age gap, different socioeconomic status, but we were both affected in a very similar way. I do invite you to share any stories you have about how you may have been treated as a teen, listeners. You can contribute it to speakofthedevilpod@gmail.com. If you feel like you are alone, depressed, please call the National Suicide Hotline, or any sort of additional help will be shown in the contents in the info for this episode.
Oh, yeah, and I could definitely attest for counseling and mental health help to get you through and find some peace in your life. Meditation helps, working out, stuff like that. I've found a little sliver of peace in my life, and it's because of counseling and stuff like that. And so that was something about the Columbine stuff that was unfortunate. They pushed a lot of anti-psychiatry, psychoactive pills, and they're wrong about that. Those things are really nice.
I think it's important for people to know that it's not a point of weakness to seek help, and that you are improving yourself by seeking any sort of mental health help.
And I said something to a friend who's been helping me out through this, and I said, I just don't want this. I'm doing EMDR therapy now, and it's really cool. And I said, I just don't want this to change the way I think. I don't want it to change my writing and my artwork. I'm a little afraid to enter into this therapy because it's almost like hypnotism. And she's like, Shane, the trauma changed you. The trauma is what they're going to get rid of, but the charm is what rewired you. So you're going to be yourself. You're going to go back. You're going to be rewired to be yourself. And I was like, that's so true. The trauma rewires you. Those things rewire you. And when you're able to do it in a thoughtful way, like psychotherapy or CBT therapy, I take cognitive behavioral therapy. Mm-hmm. Those things have worked well for me. And I see psychiatrists as the modern magicians, the occultists that you can't play with. You can't lie to them. They know when you look to your right, you're lying. They know when you look to your left, you're doing this. They know. And so that's magic. You don't want to play poker with a fucking psychiatrist.
This topic is super controversial, especially because we've had a couple years of very recent history in concentration of mass shooters. I hope you all understand as well that we do not condone this behavior, and we are keeping this conversation though because it's not right to erase it. And it's important to converse about this topic in order to find a solution to it that betters all of us.
That's right. It's more evidence and more stuff to research for another generation. That's why I'm not. I don't. I've never said these things to promote this kind of stuff. I mean, when I was younger, we'll talk about that with Art That Kills.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely, like I said earlier, we're looking people that are damage, and they're looking for peace, and we got to figure out a way to give them a slice of peace.
One slice of peace that I could suggest to you all, courtesy of Wokeface, is to be good to yourself. Have a good one. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe and tune in to our next episode, wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. You can find us at Speak of the Devil Pod on Twitter and contact us at speakofthedevilpod@gmail.com. For Shane's artwork or to support his endeavors, please visit shanebugby.com or find him on Twitter at ShaneBugby. I've been Nannerl. Have a good one.
Oh, and shaneisthedevil.com.